In the middle of chaos, when everything is moving fast, when people are reacting, shouting, rushing decisions, the ones who survive, the ones who lead, are never the loudest. They're the calmest, not because they feel less, but because they don't let it control them. And here's what nobody tells you about that sentence. Not letting it control you is not a personality trait. It's not something you're born with. It's not a gift that some people have and others simply don't. It's a skill, built in the small moments, in the ordinary friction, in the Tuesday afternoon when the comment lands wrong and nobody is watching and nothing is at stake, and you choose not to move with it. That's where it's built, not in the crisis, in everything before the crisis. The war opening. In high-pressure situations, panic spreads fast. One wrong reaction, one rushed decision, one emotional move made in the 3 seconds before clarity arrived, and everything starts to fall apart. There's a reason military commanders are trained specifically not to react to the first report, because the first report is almost always incomplete. The first information is the most emotional information, the most distorted, the most likely to produce a response that the situation doesn't actually require. And the commanders who survived, the ones whose decisions held under the worst possible pressure, were not the ones who responded fastest. They were the ones who waited long enough for the picture to clarify. Chesty, United States Marine Corps general, one of the most decorated Marines in American history. During the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, surrounded on all sides, vastly outnumbered in temperatures that made the equipment fail, the situation by every objective measure was catastrophic, and his response, "We're surrounded." That simplifies the problem. Same situation, completely different perception. The environment didn't change. He did. And in choosing what the situation was going to mean, he changed what was possible inside it. His Marines didn't follow him because he had a better plan. They followed him because he was the same person at the worst possible moment as he was at every other moment. And that consistency, that specific, unshakable quality of someone who has chosen their response before the situation demanded it, is the thing that calm actually is. Now step out of that world and into yours, because the environment changed, the stakes changed, the consequences changed, but the pattern didn't. You're in a conversation. It starts normal. Then something shifts. A comment lands slightly wrong, not aggressive, not a crisis, just enough. And you feel it, that quick internal movement. Your chest tightens, your thoughts speed up, your tone changes, just slightly, without you deciding to change it. Now you're not responding anymore, you're reacting. And in that moment, that specific, almost invisible moment that most people never catch, you've already lost something. Not the argument, not the conversation, control. And most people never even notice when that happens. Here's what it looks like from the outside. Two people in the same pressure. One is inside it. Voice slightly elevated, energy slightly compressed, responding to each new development as it arrives. Reactive, sequential, predictable. The other is above it. Same pressure, same room, same information arriving at the same speed. But their relationship to it is different. They are not being moved by what is moving everyone else. And that difference, visible before either person has said a word, determines who leads. Every time, without exception. Most people think winning is about being right, being faster, being stronger in the moment. It's not. Winning, real, lasting, consistent winning, is staying in control when everything inside you is telling you not to. Because while everyone else is reacting, the calmest person is deciding. You never feel like you're losing control while it's happening. It feels justified. That's the specific and important distinction. It doesn't feel like loss of control. It feels like this is the right reaction. Any reasonable person would react this way. I'm not overreacting. This situation earned this response. And that feeling, completely real, completely convincing, completely understandable, is the mechanism of the trap. Because the justification arrives before the examination, the emotion provides the permission. And by the time the permission was granted, the response was already in motion. This is the internal sequence nobody talks about. Not the external moment, the comment, the tone, the message. The internal sequence that takes the external moment and converts it into something that demands a response before you've decided whether one is warranted. The neurological reality. There's a reason this happens, not a philosophical reason, a biological one. The part of the brain that processes threat is faster than the part that evaluates it. By the time the evaluating part has assessed whether this is actually a threat, the threat response has already fired, already produced the emotional state, already loaded the reaction, already made the justification feel like clarity. This is not a character flaw. It's a design feature that was extremely useful in an environment where threats were physical and delay was fatal. In an environment where most threats are social, most urgency is manufactured, and most reactions cost more than the thing they were reacting to. The same feature produces the same response to completely different stimuli, and the result is a person who is physiologically in a high alert state over a message, a comment, a tone, a look. The body doesn't distinguish, only training does. You get a message, short, cold, no context, and immediately, before a breath, before a single fact has arrived, your mind fills the gap. They're ignoring me. That was intentional. This isn't good. And now your response is ready, before you know the truth. Before any information has arrived to justify the emotional state you're already inside. And none of it is real. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But you're already responding to it. Most reactions don't come from reality. They come from interpretation. And once you act on interpretation, you're solving the wrong problem. War parallel. Admiral James Stockdale. Admiral James Stockdale was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for over 7 years. The most senior naval officer held at the Hanoi Hilton, and the conditions were designed specifically to produce reactive behavior. Degradation, uncertainty, punishment designed to arrive without pattern or warning, specifically to keep the nervous system in permanent alert. Because a permanently alert nervous system is a reactive nervous system, and a reactive prisoner is a manageable prisoner. Stockdale survived because he understood the mechanism, not just intellectually, in practice. Every day. He wrote afterward about the discipline of separating what was actually happening from what the mind was doing with what was happening. The event and the interpretation of the event, they are not the same thing. And the person who can hold them apart, who can feel the reaction rise and still ask, is this what's actually happening? Or is this what I think it means? Has something the reactive person doesn't. Time, and time, even a fraction of a second, is where thinking lives. Control doesn't happen after, it happens during. And during is a skill, not a natural state, not a personality trait, a skill, built in the gap between the trigger and the response. That gap can be widened, with practice, every time. The hidden trigger. You don't lose control because of pressure. You lose it because something inside you gets touched, and most people spend their entire lives never identifying what that thing is. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives wearing other labels: frustration, righteous response, confidence, the very reasonable reaction to a genuinely unreasonable thing. But underneath those labels, something more specific, a need to be right, a need to be respected, a need to not look weak in the specific way that weakness has cost something before. And the moment any of those get touched, the reaction fires. Not to the situation, to what the situation represents. The geometry of triggers. The moments that hit hardest are never random. They share a shape, a specific geometry of threat that the nervous system has mapped from something earlier. Not last Tuesday, earlier than that. An environment that required a certain level of vigilance. A dynamic that taught that this particular thing, disrespect, dismissal, correction, being made small in front of others, was something to respond to immediately and forcefully. Because at the time, that response was correct. The nervous system doesn't file that response under the specific circumstances that produced it. It files it under the shape of the threat. And every time that shape reappears, regardless of the actual stakes, regardless of the actual danger, regardless of whether the current situation has anything in common with the original one except the shape, the response fires. Same speed, same intensity, as if the original situation is happening again. Ego as signal. In genuinely high-pressure environments, ego is a liability, not confidence. Ego, the specific attachment to how the situation reflects on you, rather than what the situation actually requires. A commander reacting to protect their pride has stopped seeing the field. They're managing their image while the situation continues developing without their full attention. The same thing happens in every room where someone's trigger has been activated. They are no longer in the conversation. They are in the defense of something the conversation threatened. And the conversation, indifferent to that defense, continues without them. War parallel. General William Slim. General William Slim commanded the Burma campaign in World War II, widely considered the most difficult land campaign the British Army fought. Retreating through impossible terrain, supply lines failing, disease decimating the force before combat did. And Slim's leadership style was documented precisely by everyone who served under him. He never reacted to the shape of the threat. He assessed the actual threat. When a situation was catastrophic, and many of them were, he named it accurately, not catastrophically, not with the emotional loading that the shape of catastrophe normally produces. He assessed what was real, separated it from what was feared, and acted on the former. His soldiers described it as the quality of a man who was never surprised into being someone else. The worst possible thing could arrive, and he was still the same person, not because nothing reached him, because he had learned to identify what was actually arriving versus what his nervous system was telling him was arriving. And that distinction, practiced across years, built in the small moments before the enormous ones, is the thing that made him the calmest person in every room he ever entered. The shift. Now imagine the same moment, same trigger, same words, same situation. But this time, you recognize the shape. You feel the reaction rise, and you ask one question before following it. Is this what's actually happening? Or is this what my nervous system thinks is happening? That question, asked in less than a second, is the entire distance between the reaction and the response, between the shape of the threat and the actual threat, between being operated by something that happened years ago and being present in the room you're actually in. The distinction from, I feel this, so I act on it, to, I feel this, but I choose what happens next. Feeling isn't the problem. Identification is. The moment you become the reaction, the moment the feeling and the self collapse into each other, the choice disappears. And without the choice, the situation is running you. The next time you feel that reaction rise, don't look at the situation. Look at the shape of it. Ask what it resembles. Ask what it's threatening. Ask whether the threat is real, or whether you're responding to the memory of a threat that happened somewhere else. Because once you can see the shape, you can stop being operated by it. The silent advantage power isn't always visible. In fact, the strongest kind rarely is. You walk into a tense situation. You can feel it immediately. Voices slightly raised, energy unsettled, everyone trying to be heard over everyone else. Nothing extreme, but something's off. And in moments like this, most people do the same thing. They add to it, more words, more pressure, more force, and then there's one person who doesn't. They don't interrupt, they don't rush to speak, they don't try to overpower anything. They observe, and somehow that's the person everyone starts paying attention to. Why this happens? Because when everything feels unstable, People look for stability, not noise, certainty, and calm signals certainty, not through words, through presence, the specific quality of someone who is not being moved by what is moving everyone else. That quality, visible before a word is spoken, felt before the person acts, communicates something that no argument can reach. I am not inside this, I am above it. And I will be the same person when it's over as I was when it started. That's what people follow, not the loudest voice, the steadiest one. Pace as power. Two people in conflict, fast, emotional, back and forth. Then someone else speaks, slower, lower, clear. No tension in the voice, no urgency in the delivery. And instantly, everything shifts. Not because they said something brilliant, not because the argument was superior, because of how they said it. Delivery is control. When you stay calm, you control the pace. And the one who controls the pace controls the interaction, because everyone else is reacting, and you're not. They're inside the moment. You're above it. They're responding to what just happened. You're deciding what happens next. Roger Federer. Roger Federer played some of the most pressure-saturated tennis ever witnessed. Grand Slam finals, fifth set tiebreaks, crowds in varying states of noise and expectation. And the quality that every opponent described in almost identical terms was not his technique. It was his pace. He never sped up when the match demanded speed. He slowed down. The bigger the point, the slower his preparation. The deeper the pressure, the more deliberate every movement between points, not as a tactic, as a trained physiological response to pressure. Because he understood what every high-performance environment eventually reveals, speed under pressure is the nervous system trying to escape the moment. Slowness under pressure is the trained mind staying inside it. And inside the moment, with the full picture available, with the pace controlled, with the nervous system not running the show, you see things that the reactive person moving at speed cannot see. His opponents gave him information, every rushed shot, every anxious repositioning, every tell produced by a nervous system trying to escape the pressure they were both inside. And Federer, slower, more deliberate, genuinely present in the moment rather than fleeing it, collected it and used it. Silence as information. The same principle operates in every interaction. When you don't react, when you hold the space and let the other person move first, they reveal themselves. They explain more than they planned. They justify more than was necessary. They fill the silence with everything they would have held back if you'd given them something to push against. Not because you forced it, because you didn't react. Silence creates space. And in that space, people reveal themselves. General Grant, Ulysses. Grant commanded at a point in the Civil War when everything was moving fast and every voice around him was adding to the noise. Reports arriving before verification, generals pushing competing positions, political pressure from Washington on decisions that hadn't been made yet. And Grant's style, documented by every officer who served under him, was the complete absence of urgency. He didn't rush orders. He didn't repeat himself. He didn't raise his voice to compete with the noise. He spoke once, clearly, and moved. Sherman described it. He explained nothing, excused nothing, and bragged about nothing. No urgency, no performance, no attempt to manage how the decision was being received, just the decision. And the people around him, in an environment where everything was moving fast, found in that stillness exactly what they needed, something to anchor to. Most people try to earn presence by adding more words, more explanations, more force. But presence doesn't come from volume, it comes from control. And control is felt before it's understood. People don't just hear you, they read you. Before the first word, before the first sentence, before the argument begins. They read your relationship to the pressure that exists in the room. And the person who doesn't need anything from the moment, who is complete regardless of outcome, is the most difficult person in any room to move. And the person who can't be moved becomes the one who moves everything else. Where most people lose it. Most people don't lose control in one moment. They lose it slowly, in a way that feels invisible until it isn't. It starts small. A conversation that didn't sit right. A moment you replayed later. Something you brushed off, but didn't really let go. You move on, but it stays, not at the surface, underneath. Then something else happens. Another situation, another friction, another moment you absorb and continue past. Still manageable, still under control, until it isn't, because pressure doesn't disappear when you move past it. It accumulates. The breakpoint. You've handled everything well all day. Stayed composed, stayed measured, moved through the friction without letting it show. Then something small happens. A delay, a comment, a minor mistake by someone who should know better. And your reaction is bigger than it should be. Not because of that moment, because of everything before it. It's never just one thing. It's everything you didn't release. Compression. This is where most people get it wrong. They think control means holding everything in, suppressing reactions, pushing through pressure, being the person who keeps going regardless of what they're carrying. But that's not control. That's compression. And compression always, eventually, inevitably, breaks. Not because the person is weak, not because the philosophy failed. Because compression has a structural limit. And once that limit is reached, the release is never proportionate to the original pressure. It's proportionate to everything that accumulated on the way. War parallel, fatigue. In genuinely high-pressure environments, fatigue is more dangerous than fear. Not because it's intense, because it builds quietly. A soldier doesn't fear fatigue the way they fear danger. Fatigue doesn't announce itself. It arrives gradually. In the slightly slower decision, the slightly less sharp assessment, the judgment call that would have been obvious 12 hours earlier that now requires effort to access. Until the point where judgment slips, focus fades, control weakens, and the mistake that changes everything comes from a person who was fully capable before the accumulation took the edge. Your life works the same way, just without the noise. What you don't process, you carry. And what you carry, you eventually set down in the wrong place. Where most people quietly lose. This is where most people quietly lose. Not in the first moment, not even in the 10th. In the 5th hour of a day where pressure didn't stop, where situations kept stacking, where the reset didn't come before the next thing arrived. And the composure that was genuine in the morning becomes performance by the afternoon. And performance, unlike genuine composure, can be seen. And once it can be seen, the advantage is gone. The core problem. That's where control fades. Not because you don't understand this, because you can't return to it fast enough. Knowing how to stay calm once doesn't mean much if you can't access it when it actually matters. When the 4th difficult situation of the day arrives and the reset hasn't happened yet, that's a systems problem. You need something that brings you back, automatically. Not motivation, not reminders. Something that conditions you to return to control, again and again, no matter what's happening around you. There is a gap that almost everyone encounters with content like this. The understanding arrives, clean, clear, convincing. And then the pressure comes, the 4th situation of the day. The moment the reset didn't happen. The point where everything that was understood in the calm becomes unavailable in the friction. Because understanding and daily conditioning are different things entirely. I built 3 systems specifically for that gap. Unshakable mental discipline, the 30-day mental discipline system, and the daily Stoic reset. Not more information, daily structure. The specific practice that builds the return to composure as a reflex, not an effort. All 3 are in the description. Now, let's continue. Imagine the opposite, Pressure comes, but you don't carry it forward. Each moment ends when it ends. Nothing stacks, nothing lingers. Now you're not just calm, you're clear. And clarity, unlike composure, doesn't require effort. It's just what's left when nothing is being held unnecessarily. Because it's not the pressure that breaks people, it's the weight they never put down. Why calm makes you dangerous? Calm doesn't just protect you, it gives you an advantage most people never see, because they're looking for the advantage in the wrong place, in the argument, in the volume, in the faster response that gets there first. And the person operating from calm isn't competing on those terms. They're operating on completely different terms. Same situation, same pressure, same stakes. One person reacts. They speak faster, defend immediately, push harder. The other person doesn't. They listen, they pause, they watch. And something shifts. Because the moment one person reacts and the other doesn't, the balance changes permanently. Reading the reactive person becomes predictable. You can feel it, their tone, their urgency, their need to resolve the moment in a particular direction. They're moving fast because something inside them is pushing them to. And once you see that, you're no longer in the same position. You're not inside the moment anymore. You're reading it. And reading a moment while the other person is inside it is one of the most significant asymmetries available in any interaction. Silence as information. Someone challenges you, pushes your point, questions you directly. They expect resistance. They expect energy. They expect a reaction that matches what they brought. And instead, you stay still. You let them finish. No interruption, no urgency, no visible preparation of the counter-argument. And something interesting happens. They keep talking. They explain more than they planned. They justify more than was necessary. They fill the silence with everything they would have held back if you'd given them something to push against. Not because you forced it, because you didn't react. Silence creates space, and in that space, people reveal themselves. War anchor, Admiral Chester. Nimitz. Admiral Chester Nimitz commanded the Pacific Fleet at the most critical moment of the Second World War. After Pearl Harbor, after the most devastating single attack on American naval forces in history, the expectation from Washington, from the public, from the entire weight of a nation in shock, was immediate aggressive response. Nimitz arrived at Pearl Harbor and walked the devastation in complete silence. For 2 days, while everyone around him was inside the emotion of what had happened, he assessed, not performing calm, not suppressing the weight of it, genuinely reading the situation as it actually was, rather than as the shock was telling everyone it was. And what he saw was different from what the emotion said. The aircraft carriers were not at Pearl Harbor when the attack happened. The fuel reserves were largely intact. The infrastructure, though damaged, was repairable. The situation was serious, not catastrophic. And from that assessment, made in calm, made with full presence, made without the distortion of reactive emotion, he built the strategy that eventually won the Pacific War. Not because he was smarter than every other admiral, because he was the calmest, and the calmest person in any room always sees more than everyone else. The observer. Now imagine being that person, not performing stillness, not forcing calm as a tactic, actually not needing the moment to go a certain way. Someone is emotional, frustrated, trying to pull you into that state, and instead of matching it, you stay grounded. You don't absorb it, you don't reflect it, you observe it, and from that observation, you can see what they're actually saying, what they're feeling, what they're trying to do. And once you see that, you're not reacting anymore. You're choosing, and choice is where control lives. And over time, this changes how people experience you. They can't rush you. They can't easily provoke you. They can't predict you. They can't use your reaction as a tool against you because you're not providing one. And because of that, they respect you without you asking for it. Not because you dominated anything, because the person who can't be moved becomes the one who moves everything else. the moment it changes. At some point, this stops being something you try to do and becomes who you are. Not all at once, gradually. In the accumulation of small moments where you chose differently than you would have chosen 12 months ago, you start to notice it. Situations that used to pull you in don't. Things that used to trigger you feel distant. Not because they disappeared, not because life got easier, not because the pressure stopped, because you see them differently, from the outside rather than the inside, from above rather than within, from the position of someone who identified the shape and chose not to follow it into a reaction the situation didn't warrant. The same situation, the same kind of moment happens again. A comment lands wrong. Someone challenges you. Something shifts unexpectedly. Before, that would have been enough. But now, there's a gap, a space between what happens and what you do next. And inside that space, you're aware. You feel the reaction rise, but you don't follow it. You let it pass. And in that moment, you realize something. You're not controlled by it anymore. That's the moment everything changes. The real distinction. Because control was never about stopping emotion. It was about not becoming it. The person who loses control doesn't feel more than others. They become what they feel. The feeling and the self collapse into each other. And in that collapse, the choice disappears. The person who stays in control feels exactly as much, but maintains the distance, the specific practiced daily distance between what they feel and who they are. The feeling is information, not instruction. In the most intense situations, the ones that define what a person is actually made of, the ones who lead under pressure are never the ones without fear. They're the ones who don't let fear decide. They feel it, completely, physically, without performance, and they stay steady anyway. Not because they're extraordinary, because they practiced in the ordinary moments before the extraordinary ones arrived. The cold morning, the difficult conversation, the small friction that nobody was watching. That's where they built it, and that's where you build it too. The choice. Every moment of pressure, every difficult interaction, every situation that tests you is giving you the same choice. React, and the moment takes you. Remain, and you take the moment. Life doesn't stop applying pressure. People don't stop testing you. Situations don't get easier. That part never changes, but you do. The identity. You become someone who doesn't rush, who doesn't react blindly, who doesn't get pulled into every situation that presents itself. Someone who sees clearly, moves deliberately, chooses carefully, who is the same person in the difficult moment as in every other moment. And that consistency, that specific quality of someone who cannot be surprised into being someone else, is the rarest thing in any room, because most people never reach that point. They stay reactive, pulled by emotion, controlled by situations, moved by everything around them, and they wonder, usually quietly, usually late, why the outcomes don't match the effort, why the intelligence is there but the execution isn't, why the understanding is present but the composure disappears when it matters most. And the answer is always the same thing. They knew what calm was. They just hadn't built it into the ordinary moments before the extraordinary ones arrived. The calmest person always wins. Not because they're stronger, not because they're smarter, not because the world treated them more fairly, because they built something in the small moments that nobody saw, that was available to them in every large moment that everyone did. Because in a world full of reaction, the one who stays still controls everything that moves. If this reached something, send it to someone who is capable of everything this describes and just hasn't built it into the daily practice yet. In the comments, 3 words: I stay ready. The specific work of becoming someone who can't be moved. Subscribe and stay with it. Unshakable mental discipline, the 30-day mental discipline system, and the daily Stoic reset pack in the description. In a world full of reaction, the one who stays still, controls everything that moves.